All right, welcome into the Boston Sports Beat. Let's bring in Sean McAdam, and what else? We're going to talk about the Red Sox and their win last night against the Tampa Bay Rays, advancing to the ALCS. It's almost we're past the point of hyperbole with this team. It's not one anyone expected to do anything. Maybe finish 500 would have been a victory. I think there's a lot of people that would have been thrilled with just reaching the playoffs. Even had they lost to the Yankees, it's a victory. You beat the Yankees. That kind of, you and I talked after game one, that almost kind of felt like the World Series. They did it. They got into the dance. Looks like Tampa's outclassing them. Could you have imagined after game one and after the grand slam off of Chris Sale making it 5-2 in game two, that what happened in
We'd be here.
everything after that would have happened, and we'd be here where we are today with the Red Sox.
Frankly, no.
3-1 win.
How could you have, foreseen that turn of events? In game one, they lose 5-0. They hit the ball hard and had some good at bats, hit into some tough luck. But you saw that aggressiveness and athleticism that Tampa Bay is known for, and you just said, well, this is clearly a team that is worlds better than the Red Sox. They finished 8 games in front of them during the regular season. They shut them out in game one. They're up 3 runs in the second or third inning. And now the Red Sox have met the real power of the American League, and it shows how much they have to make up. Now, 2.5 games later, they have dispatched with the Rays. They're moving on to the ALCS, and it gives you however accurately or inaccurately, a whole different view or picture of where things stand.
And what's amazing is you got a true snapshot of almost every aspect of this team in each of its wins, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
You see, starting pitching's been a question mark, and Chris Sale gives you a really shoddy performance there, but they bounce back and they get really good efforts from Eovaldi. They get another one from Erod in game 4, and boom, bullpen blows 2 leads, but also saves their bacon with great performances from guys like Pivetta and Whitlock. So you're getting good with the bad there. Defense, you're seeing them bungle the ball, make some bad plays. Renfroe had a tough time on a couple of balls in right yesterday, and some bad decisions. Kyle Schwarber, and then yet they have an incredible relay to cut down a runner, which is a game-saving sort of play. So you're really getting the full Red Sox experience in all of this. And this is kind of what you've had all year long, is their warts are fully exposed and they're out there, and they're still able to overcome some of this stuff with, truly heroic performances from people coming all over the place that you don't necessarily expect, but you kind of have to at this point.
Yeah, they're imperfect, certainly.
Yeah.
There are some holes on that roster and question marks going forward and things that have to be shorn up, both in the next round and should they make it to the World Series then, but also in the big picture going forward for 2022 and beyond. But they do have a resilience to them. And I spoke to Chaim Bloom about that on the field last night, and he said, look, people have underestimated the toughness of this team. And he pointed back to, sort of what was probably the low point of the season, which was Xander Bogaerts being pulled off the field in the middle of the second inning on August 31st at Tropicana Field with the COVID outbreak raging that would claim almost half the major league roster. And that night they lost and fell 10 games out of first place, which was the biggest deficit they had all year.
Yep.
And people thought this team is cooked. And here it is 6 weeks later, and they're going on the ALCS, and they just beat the team that they finished 8 games in back of. So, yeah, it hasn't been perfect. And you're right, there have been some flaws that have been exposed. But I think at this point of the season, John, every team's got flaws, and it's a matter of covering them up, at least temporarily, and overcoming them, which the Red Sox have done.
Yeah, and as you said, if you watched the Rays and what they were doing and trotting out there with their pitching game after game, you'd be like, "Wow, this team's got problems." And you're right, this was the best team in the American League, and they couldn't find a way to get it together. They did some they incredibly athletic, dynamic team, terrific on defense, but they also had their problems, and the Red Sox got the best of them in a really, really exciting series. Just, you mentioned the Rays, comparing the Red Sox. a lot of teams would compare themselves once upon a time to the Red Sox. That's the
Mhm.
standard. That's who you want to be. And we talked about this on an earlier podcast, but Tampa's the team the Red Sox want to be when they grow up. They bring in Heim Bloom, and they really want to be a team that develops talent, doesn't go out there and overpay. You've got the Yankees questioning themselves, obviously, after, flailing and going out in the wild card against the Red Sox. Obviously, it makes sense to be more fiscally responsible and develop your own talent. It's just easier said than done. And when you're a team like the Red Sox, it's not easy, but you can spend your way out of a lot of problems. That's still not the goal. After 2 years of Heim Bloom, you think the Red Sox have closed the gap at all on the Rays and becoming like the Rays, or this is just kind of a you know perfect storm sort of moment here?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful not to react to essentially 22 innings, which is where the Red Sox got themselves into this ALCS by beating the Rays back to back in walk-off wins that frankly could have gone either way. And that's to take nothing away from what the Red Sox have accomplished. I just think it's a little premature to say, well, they've closed the gap. And, 2 years into his tenure here, Bloom has achieved what he set out to do. That isn't the case yet. I still think that the Rays are probably better positioned for the near future because they've got this young, controllable, mostly homegrown roster. But you alluded to the fact that the Red Sox do have the resources that the Rays don't. And when I say that the Red Sox want to emulate Tampa Bay, I want to make clear I'm not advocating for a $75 million payroll, and that's never what the Red Sox were going to do anyway. But the word that Heim Bloom says so much that he's sick of it is sustainability. And that's the ability to be a competitive team year after year and avoid the sort of boom bust pattern we've seen here over the last 10 years. Yeah, the Red Sox have won 2 World Series since 2013. They've also finished last a number of times, which should never happen to a team with those resources. And what Bloom wants to do is really not anything that was evident necessarily on the Fenway Park field the last couple of nights, but it's more a top to bottom macro look at the organization where there is a deep farm system that is continually producing pieces for the major league roster, so that if a player leaves via free agency or you don't think it's worth retaining him, there are answers in the system. So it's not just about being in the ALCS, which is a good signal for where this organization is headed, but it's also below the surface that you don't necessarily see on nights like last night, and that's the retooling of the minor league system to provide a lot of talent going forward.
Yeah, and so there appears to be some in the pipeline, but again, until they get to the majors, it's hard to tell exactly what you have. We saw, obviously, in the case of Jaron Duran this year, how overwhelmed he looked in his short stint. But there's promise there where there wasn't a couple of years ago, no doubt.
Mhm.
The Red Sox don't know who they're going to play, so just a quick look, Sean. It's Houston versus the White Sox. It would seem on paper Houston is the better all-around ball club. So if you were to pick your opponent, you might pick Chicago. I don't know if you necessarily agree.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a danger to wanting Chicago because they're starting pitching. That team reminds me a little bit of Washington from 2019. The Nationals won it all that year, and they did it in a somewhat throwback fashion because you remember they relied on sort of traditional aces in that rotation with Strasburg and Scherzer and Corbin and some other guys. People said this was kind of a throwback. And when I look at the White Sox roster and you see Lance Lynn and Dylan Cease and Lucas Giolito and Carlos Rodon, that's kind of an old school rotation where the guys go out there and give you 5, 6, 7 innings. And when those guys are all going well, that's something you have to worry about. But the Red Sox have not matched up against Houston over the last couple of years. They've lost. They lost both series this year, dropped 3 out of 4 in Houston, dropped 2 out of 3 here. The Astros are relentless. I think they're on a mission to try to prove to people, see what happened in 2017 with the sign stealing isn't who we are. Yeah, we paid our price, but we're back and we can still win. Houston is the tougher matchup. It's also the most intriguing matchup, obviously, with the Cora connection and everything else. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of World Series, Sean. It maybe have some fun. Play Houston, see what happens. And you're right, it is a super intriguing matchup because there's a
Yep.
million different storylines there. So that one will be certainly fun to watch. But again, Red Sox happy to be here, and again in a season where this was certainly not what anybody expected, from this team. All right, let's switch gears, talk some hoops with Sherrod Blakely. And Sherrod, we don't have Celtics news per se. We have Celtics adjacent news and a couple of huge stories in the NBA, just a few, like 12, 14 hours apart. First off, Ben Simmons, we find out Monday night, just shows up to Philadelphia.
Hi, it's me,
Hi,
Ben.
hey, sitting outside the door holding a boombox over his head. I'm back. I love you. No idea, no explanation yet. We'll see what comes of that. That situation is bizarre. But as bizarre as that is, Kyrie Irving says, hey, hold my beer. Well, not really Kyrie as much as the Nets, who did what some people were wondering, whether they would do or not, which is tell Kyrie to shove it, basically. And that's what happened. GM Sean Marks comes out with a statement today announcing Kyrie Irving will not play with the team at all until he resolves his vaccination status. As everybody knows, he wasn't going to be allowed to play in home games. There was an exemption to practice with the team. It was just not really a tenable situation. And this is the resolution right now. It's, get the shot or you're gone. And that's what we have. But no reaction from Kyrie yet. We don't know how this is going to play. But are you just your initial reaction to the announcement by the Nets that Kyrie's out?
Well, just major props to Sean Marks for actually taking a position on this. I mean, to me, that whole he can practice with us and play half the games is such a wishy-washy way of doing things, that particularly for a team that is built to win a championship. And I love the part in Sean Marks' statement where he says that, you have to be all in. We're all in on this. And if you're not, then we don't need you. We don't want you. You're not going to help us. Now, talent-wise, Kyrie is a phenomenal player. We all know that. But if you can't get that Kyrie to be all in, you don't need any Kyrie, because it is only going to be a distraction. It's only going to mess up your team chemistry. And frankly, it's not fair to the guys who maybe had some reservations about getting vaccinated, but did so for the betterment of the team. I think about Marcus Smart, who made it clear one of the main reasons why he got vaccinated was because he didn't want to be a distraction to the Celtics, and he didn't want to deal with all that BS. So, and he mentioned, oh, by the way, me being available helps our team win games, which is true. Kyrie, they respect his position, but they're going to keep it moving with or without him, which I again, props to Sean Marks for taking that stance.
And not to turn this into a full conversation about should you, shouldn't you. Obviously, the majority of people are vaccinated. You and I have strong opinions on it. That's not really the issue for me. It's nobody wants to, as you said with Marcus Smart, nobody wakes up today and says, I want somebody to go stick a needle in my arm. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to take stuff. I don't really know what's in it. I'm just trusting people. Yeah, but that's just kind of what you do. I'm sure there's lots of things you don't want to do. And you're right. There are plenty of people who are in that camp of, well, if you didn't make me, I probably wouldn't have gotten it, which I think is the majority of the kind of anti-vax, segment of the population. Is I don't really want, it's just not my thing. It's not a thing I do. I would prefer not to. But you run a situation like this and your paycheck is, going to be withheld from you, or there's a mandate, or life is going to be really difficult. Most players, if we've seen, they went from 85 to 90 all the way up to about 96% vaccinated, including strong holdouts like an Andrew Wiggins type. People really, really, really didn't want to do it. We're like, all right, I'll do it. So Kyrie is really, as he's been in a lot of his career with a lot of different things, really on an island here. As far as the Nets, look, they were overwhelming title favorites with this roster coming in fully healthy. They're still the favorites. This team, because you have James Harden and you have KD and a fair amount of depth behind it, they can get by without Kyrie. So this isn't, they're better with him, sure, but this isn't that risky. If you're the Celtics, you're still looking up at this team.
Yeah. And that's really the reality. I mean, the margin has shrunk, obviously, without having a Kyrie available, but Brooklyn is still the team to beat in the East, with all respect to defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, who, again, I was on a call just the other day with Giannis, and we talked a bit about that. Brooklyn is still the team that, on paper at least, everyone in the Eastern Conference, and frankly out West as well, is aiming for. But the one thing I will say is this: even though he is going to be out of the picture indefinitely, his presence, his specter is still going to hover over that organization. When they lose a game to one of the top teams, it's going to be, man, they may have won that if they had Kyrie. If they're winning and they're winning without him, they're going to be like, well, it's kind of like when he was in Boston and they got all the way to the conference finals without Kyrie, without Gordon Hayward. So regardless of what Kyrie does, the narrative is always going to include him in this situation until there's a clear resolution. And again, the one thing I'll say, the last thing on this is this: Kyrie not being able to play, not being able to practice, to me is the right move for everyone involved. Because if you are that hell bent on taking this position, then there's, to me, whatever your decision, there is an element of sacrifice involved. If you get the needle and you don't want to, you're sacrificing to some extent getting that done. If you don't want to get the needle, you're sacrificing a lot of money and potentially your career. And if you're willing to take that sacrifice, then by all means do that. But being able to practice but only play some games, that to me, it's a wishy-washy way. And I'm glad that Sean Marks just nipped that in the bud, and it's either he's all in or out.
The irony, Sherrod, with Kyrie is, for a person who doesn't want to make it about him, it's constantly about him. He cannot avoid the spotlight here. And again, I don't really know what he thought was going to happen. And so here's where we are. This wouldn't be surprising. Would you be stunned if he just retired? I mean, I don't really know how this is going to resolve itself. I do not see a world in which he caves, though.
No, I don't either. And to answer your question, I would not be shocked if he decided, I'm just never going to play in the NBA again. Kyrie, it's not about money for him. Obviously, it's not about doing what everyone is doing and kind of playing follow the leader. It's about marching to the beat of a drum whose sound only he hears and only he can comprehend. And that's fine if that's how you want to live your life. But again, the NBA players, society, they've kind of tried to navigate this situation in a way that benefits, to some extent, most, if not all, people. And Kyrie respectfully doesn't agree with that direction. And he is, again, every decision we make, there are consequences, good and bad. And clearly, Kyrie is comfortable with the decision that he's made to, again, essentially distance himself from the team and potentially put his career going forward in a clear state of limbo.
Right. And right now you've got New York, you've got San Fran. I think LA is doing it. This rule, it would not be surprising. And again, it's the cities, not the league, that's dictating this situation for Kyrie right now. It will not be surprising if you see this in Boston, in Detroit, in Chicago, and other major metropolitan areas. And that I think it's very possible this could affect lots of players like Kyrie. And it just so happens he's in one of the cities right now that has this rule in place, but it wouldn't be stunning going forward if this were a normal thing other places. So I wonder, I don't know if he's tradable either, because I don't know if you want to deal with this. You want to give up something real for Kyrie Irving, have him come there, have rules change in a way where you're not going to be able to have him either, or deal with whatever headache exists. I don't know how he moves forward here, because the Nets are just going to eat it, I think, and pay him half his salary and not pay him for the road games because the league has already given him clearance to do so. But I don't know if Kyrie. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there's a market for him at all.
Well, there's not, because here's the thing: it's not about teams not wanting him. It's about teams willing to give up real assets for a player who, while talent-wise, you're going to win that trade. But reality is, if you're only going to get him for half a season, and that's, and that, again, that's really being optimistic, and not even factor in that he's Kyrie Irving. And there's the layers of Kyrie Irving that go beyond what we're talking about now in this particular instance. There's just a lot that he brings to the table, talent-wise and baggage-wise. And if you're a team, I don't see why you would do that, because the assets that you're going to give up, particularly if they're young on the rise assets, are going to be far more impactful in the grand scheme of things than his presence. Because if you're only getting him for half a season, how much of a difference is he going to make? As we mentioned earlier, chemistry, team bonding, all those intangibles that you have to have if you're going to have any semblance of success. Kyrie, bring him into the fold, raises a lot of questions about whether that's a feasible accomplishment that you can get done.
Yeah, and so and it's not a apples to apples comparison, but the Celtics suffered a little bit from this with Kemba Walker last year, and it was their choice to not play him back to backs, but every time he had to miss time, they had to have a totally different team identity. And so that was you saw how bad they were in those back to backs without him. I don't think that was entirely, oh my goodness, we are useless without Kemba Walker. It was you had to completely reinvent teams and rotations. And also, when you're missing other people, or if you want to give other people a rest at times, you can't do it heading into certain games because you're already going to be short because you're missing this guy. The ripple effects on the rest of the organization are extreme when you have to play some with and some without a person. And that's what Kyrie was going to put him through. And right now, at least for now, this is what's happening. I'm not sure if Sean Marks is just trying to force his hand and might change his thinking later on. But it was reported heading in that they were going to have a discussion about this. Players were going to have their input. And this appears like an organization-wide decision. So I wonder right now if KD was like, yeah, man, we gotta, if he, I don't know if he has allies in that room anymore. So it's a really interesting situation. Speaking of which, and again, we don't want to short sell this. This was an incredible development here regarding Ben Simmons. A lot of people had already made up their minds. There's no way Ben is going back to Philly. I'm not playing the I knew it all along card, but if I had a chance to bet, I would have bet Philly versus the field in terms of where he would play this year, because I think both sides overplayed their hands as far as they could, realized it wasn't going anywhere, and Ben's like, F it. Let's go. I'm going to go get my money. I'm going to go play. I'm not going to like it. We'll see what happens down the road. But I think recognizing until he gets on the court, shows he can play, he has no chance of being traded anywhere. And he's not just going to sit at home watching his value decrease while he's also losing money. I think that's what led to him showing up there. But were you surprised that, Ben Simmons just went knocking on Philly's door and returned? I mean, it looks like the team didn't know. His agent didn't know. He just showed up.
Yeah, I was surprised just from the spontaneity dynamic of it that he just popped up on their front door. But the thing that he I think has to really come to grips with is you're not James Harden. And by that, I'm not talking about the way you play the game. I'm talking about the way you've tried to play this game. James Harden showed up at training camp in Houston out of shape, but his trade value wasn't diminished because we knew what an in-shape James Harden could be like. He's a former league MVP. He's that good. Ben Simmons has clear and undeniable questions about his game, questions about his mental toughness, questions about his leadership. And when you're out of the picture for as long as he was and potentially missing games this season, that's only going to hurt your value of getting to where you want to be.
Right.
Bottom line is Ben Simmons has to get out there and ball out. He has to show other teams that he is worth trading for. He has to give them a reason to give up assets to make a deal for him, because there are a lot more questions surrounding him on a trade market than there were for a James Harden.
Yeah, he was selling low on himself. You can't do that. The last thing anybody knows about you if you're Ben Simmons is you threw a fit because you're they said mean things about you, mean things that were true, and that are true mainly because your stubbornness or your ego prevents you from evolving your game and doing the couple of things necessary to make you a legit star, and you just won't do it. And not only that, you're going backwards on it. So
Right.
yeah, and so people could accept Ben Simmons doesn't shoot threes, but Ben Simmons doesn't shoot layups. This isn't the guy that anybody wants. So I think this is where he was, and he had really no outs left at this point. However, if you're the Celtics, this isn't great, because this Philly team, I don't care if they're not happy. This Philly team wiped the floor with you last year. And so, yes, Simmons is flawed, but Simmons does a lot of things very well, including makes life miserable for Jason Tatum. He's an incredible defensive player. They play with pace. They have size. The Celtics did not match up well against this team. And now if you were looking at where the Celtics land in the East, I'm putting them below Philly. A lot of people would be like, oh, Philly's a mess. They're above them. I can't see that anymore.
No, I mean, I think before all the Ben drama, Philly was slightly ahead of Boston. I think right now, I think they're about even. I think I would give Philly a little bit of an edge only because of Joel Embiid, who I think has figured out how to be a dominant player without necessarily bringing the team down in that process. But Ben, my one concern with Philly is whether Ben's return Whether Ben is going to be a little more selfish about his play, like try to answer a lot of the questions about his game, which may take away from the team chemistry and the team dynamics, but help him in the process. Is he going to be able to be a seamless member of the crew, help them win games, and do it in a way that doesn't take away from what others do? I don't know if he can do that because whether he or the Sixers want to embrace it, this is going to be the narrative for that team as long as he's there. This has every look and feel of an audition, that he is coming back so that he can audition for his next team. And when you have players who are thinking like that, how is that going to affect the bottom line for that organization, which for them obviously is winning?
Yeah. And it very well could be that. And he just realized it's not going to, I can't fix it from the sideline. So I do have to go show people what I can do. It's also possible that you get the whole, oh, we had some very tough conversations. Stuff needed to be said. We put it all out there. We're ready to move forward. And they just play. And winning solves everything. So you really don't know how it works out. So again, a really two super interesting developments in the Eastern Conference with direct rivals of the Celtics. So it'll be fun to see how those things play out. Sherrod, thanks a lot. All right, switching gears, we'll talk football with Greg Bedard of the Boston Sports Journal. Greg, a couple days removed from a pretty all-around ugly game against the Texans, one which the Patriots win, one which they had to win. We've had a couple days to let this marinate a little bit. Just sticking out in your head, number one takeaway, number one concern with this team has to be the defense. A week removed from the game against Tampa, where it looked like, oh, maybe they've got something. You have a performance like that. How concerned are you that what you saw on Sunday is real and a real problem going forward, or just they had a crap game?
I think I'm very concerned, John, and I think you actually, if you go back and look at it, you can say that the Bucks game was the outlier. I mean, they weren't able to stop Tua, they weren't able to stop Jameis. They did stop Brady a little bit, but when it counted, they couldn't. And they were able to stop Davis Mills. I mean, I'm very excited about that. They have problems on defense, and look, I've seen them scrap it together over the course of a season to get it done. Those previous seasons, you had Tom Brady, you had records that allowed you to get sort of set up by the end of the season. My concern is that they're not going to be able to scheme their way out of this, because I just don't know how good they are. I mean, they're really, really slow. They're
just
really
talent,
slow.
speed, athleticism. They may not have it.
And now things that you used to be able to count on, like Devin McCourty in the back end. Now all of a sudden he's an issue, and now he looks old and slow. Is that going to continue? I can't tell you that, but from this game and then putting together what we've seen in the previous games, you have to be very, very concerned about the defense. There's no speed in the front seven. Matthew Judon's the only one making plays. Kyle Van Noy takes forever to get to the quarterback if he ever gets there. Jamie Collins might help a little bit, but he's 31. This isn't 24-year-old Jamie Collins that I think Patriots fans think are just going to show up and dominate. And now JC Jackson's the number one. Well, he didn't do so well last week, and he got burned a couple of times by some guy I've never heard of named Chris Moore, who's off the practice squad. McCourty, we talked about. Duggar has struggled in space. Unless Jalen Mills is the second coming of Stephon Gilmore, I think there are serious issues. And now Dallas is coming to town.
Right. And that's the thing. And again, a lot of people preseason were saying, oh, top 5 defense is going to be the identity of this team. But this is what ends up happening. Sometimes guys just fall off a cliff. You see names like Kyle Van Noy, Donta Hightower, Devin McCourty, and you feel secure in those positions. But when those guys are playing not only below where you expect them, but possibly even below replacement level, you have some massive problems here. And that's not even to mention Gilmore being no longer available to this team, a thin defensive backfield, and some of the guys just not playing up to expectations. There were a couple of positives, though. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to say one name, at least on the defensive side of the ball, Christian Barmore. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think
I don't know if he counts for you, but I think if you're going to look for some positives on the defense, I think that's a name that certainly has popped a little.
there's no question,
Yeah,
John, that he's been next to Judon. He's probably been the most impactful player on
right.
defense, certainly in the front seven. And the kid's done. From the get go, he's done a really good job throughout. I think he started out strong in camp, and then there was a lull. He was out for a while, but ever since that time, and it almost seemed like he was out of practice every other day. But then once he got on the practice field consistently, and that's a big key with young players, is being on the field and getting those reps. Once he did that, he started to really improve, and that's continued on. And you look at him, you're like, that kid, if he keeps his head on straight and is focused on what's important and being a good pro, I mean, there's no stopping that kid interior wise. And so, yeah, he's been one of the bright spots on the team. The offensive line, I thought, played well. I think that Josh McDaniels schemed everything, planned everything to basically work off of the offensive line and to minimize their mistakes. So he made them look good. He put them in position to look good. I think McDaniels deserves a lot of credit on that. I do think there were some good individual performances. My guy, Steady Teddy Karras, did a nice job. Yadni Kajust is a guy that I haven't quite watched all the film on him, but very impressive at tackle. And look, I could see if this continues, I could see him pushing to time, especially if the Patriots aren't exactly enamored with some of the players that they currently have on that
Right.
offensive line and might be looking to make a change.
Yeah, it was almost open auditions for the offensive line, and when you've seen so many people get flat out benched mid game for stinking up the joint, seeing
Yep.
those guys play the way they played even against the Texans was definitely probably the number one shining spot from Sunday. But we can't have the conversation without talking about Mac Jones, and I know you haven't gone deep throw by throw yet. Just your initial impressions on Mac's overall game. And
I thought
whether you're seeing kind of continued growth and movement
yeah, I
in the
am.
right direction, yeah.
I think the passing game in general has slowly but surely gotten better. I mean, Hunter Henry's getting better. Kendrick Bourne's getting better. Aguilar, I think, is getting a little bit better. Jonnu Smith is, I don't know, lost at sea at this point, but hopefully they can, throw him a life preserver and reel him back in at some point. Um, Mac Jones, I thought, was better in this game, and the game plan called for him to get rid of the ball really quickly in most instances, so that's going to minimize some of his stats. And look, he had the interception, and had a couple other throws, and I think Mac Jones has to realize that, dude, it's not that he's trying to be a hero. I think he's trying to make a play all the
Right.
time when, he John, he has like 5 or 6 incompletions a game. What's 3 more? It'll still probably be over, 70%, 68%. Like he's already at like 77% every game completion percentage. Just throw a couple into the dirt and move on.
Yeah.
But I thought he was great down the stretch. I thought the plays, the touchdown to Hunter Henry in the corner of the end zone was a great play by Henry and Jones, where they really had to read what the cornerback was going to do and how Henry was going to react. And then also the third down conversion on the final drive when they basically ran out the clock. Almost the same type of play, except Henry went the other way because the cornerback was playing him outside leverage. So I think good stuff. I think the offense is making progress, not so much for the defense.
Yeah. Well, all right. Dallas in town. We'll have more later in the week as we kind of look into that matchup. But that going back to what you said about the defense, that might not be fun. So again, we'll discuss the Cowboys later in the week.